This is The Weeping Woman. Painted in October 1937 by Pablo Picasso, it's not the most traditionally pretty painting in the world, but it's not really supposed to be. There's two main reasons for that. But despite being somewhat of an acquired taste, Picasso's art just keeps getting stolen. But we'll get to that more in a little bit. The first reason this painting is in everyone's cup of tea is Picasso's rather divisive Cubist style. Picasso was born in 1881. Around the time the Impressionists were using new methods and ways to look at painting and bending the established rules. Then Picasso came along and he completely blew the rules up altogether. At a time when the advent of photography was making the more realistic style of painting somewhat redundant, artists were exploring ways to create works that weren't just copies of still images, rather expressions of something more. Cubism's main defining characteristic was drawing the subject from different angles or points in time, breaking it down into shapes and then combining them together without the usual rules of form and shape. Some people look at the results of this process and say, "That's crap, it don't even look like a woman." They assume Picasso painted this way due to a lack of talent, but the truth is the complete opposite. He mastered drawing in the classical style very early in life. If anything, he outgrew it and became bored of its constraints. As Picasso said, "A head is a matter of eyes, nose and mouth, which can be distributed in any way you like," which sounds a lot like a quote from the world's least diligent plastic surgeon. Picasso's subject for this painting was, as it was on many occasions, Dora Maar, who was in a relationship with him at the time and also a respected artist and photographer in her own right. It's probably a good thing she was in a position to understand Picasso's work so well. You can imagine a lot of people not being overly flattered by this portrayal. "Hey Pablo, my face is not wonky, and my skin is not bloody green, you tosser." She describes Weeping Woman not as a portrait of her, but instead a metaphor for the tragedy of the Spanish people, who at the time were in the middle of a civil war. Which brings us to the other reason it's not supposed to be a pretty picture: what it depicts. This painting was the last in a series of work that began with the epic Guernica, which I do hope to do a video about at some point, so please support my channel by leaving a like and clicking subscribe if you'd like to see that in the future. Picasso's Guernica was inspired by a bombing of the Spanish city of the same name a few months earlier, and it marks the first appearance of the Weeping Woman character in Picasso's work. After finishing it in June of 1937, he apparently became rather obsessed with her. Well, you would, wouldn't you? What a stunner. Over the course of the next few months, Pablo created around 60 versions of her. One of the other versions of the Weeping Woman was purchased by the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, Australia in 1985. At the time it was the most famous and expensive artwork in Australia, and in doing so it overtook this self-portrait by a dingo. At the unveiling, the gallery director Patrick McCackey said of the purchase, "We live in a Philistine nation, but a civilised city." The painting was promptly stolen. It was replaced with a note saying it had been removed for maintenance, so no one noticed for 2 days. The group calling themselves the Australian Cultural Terrorists claimed responsibility and through a series of letters mocked the arts minister in Australia at the time, calling him a pompous fathead and a tiresome bag of swamp gas, and complaining about the hick state's clumsy, unimaginative and stupid arts funding. They dared the police to try and catch them and made demands including increasing funding to the arts and setting up a Picasso ransom prize of $5,000 to be awarded to 5 young artists every year. Fortunately, the painting was found a little over 2 weeks later, undamaged, in a locker at a train station, after a tip-off probably from the thieves themselves. This was especially fortunate for the gallery as they'd chosen not to insure their prized possession, as they didn't have any money left after purchasing it. Now, I'm certainly not condoning stealing art, or anything for that matter, but if you're going to do it, that's a pretty badass way to go about it. In fact, there are over 1,000 Picasso paintings in the world currently listed as stolen, the most of any artist in history. So it shouldn't really come as much of a surprise this more famous version has been too. Back in 1969 it was pinched from the private collector of the Penrose family, who had purchased it directly from Pablo while the paint was still wet after it made such an impression. After it was recovered, they realised it wasn't safe to keep it themselves, so it's been in the Tate Modern since 1987, where it really doesn't seem very well protected. I actually have a picture of me stood right next to it a few years back and it really looks like I could just pick it up off the wall. I mean, I'm not an expert on these things. I assume there's countermeasures, alarms, a team of guards ready to jump on you and give you a good kicking, all that sort of stuff. but apparently all that could be easily circumvented with a little post-it note. Thanks for watching my video. I upload on the second Sunday of every month. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to share it with someone else you think might enjoy it. Like, share, subscribe and leave me a comment on any other stories you'd like me to cover.